Hello, and welcome to the Dissident Mama podcast. Today, my guest is Valerie Protopapas. Protopapas is of New York, and she is a prolific and unreconstructed defender of Southern history, and she is the world authority on the great Confederate partisan John Singleton Mosby. Welcome, Val. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing okay. I've actually got the computer to work, and for a paleo whose understanding of high tech is the doorknob, that's not too bad.
Well, you are one of quite a few people I have helped walk through the process of getting them onto Zoom and to record these interviews. So I feel like it's one of my many crosses to bear, but it always brings good fruit. So I'm so glad you were willing to persist through it, and so we can have this conversation.
Well, I'm very pleased. My husband always used to say, I have an opinion on things even when I don't know anything about them.
So let's dive into this, Val. So you are in New York, but you are an unreconstructed defender of Southern history. That's probably the first thing people are going to ask when they hear your voice. And if they've read your stuff, it may not match what they have read. So are you a native New Yorker? How did this all occur?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, if you went back to the Civil War era and they'd said after Richmond, what is the city most Confederate? They would have said New York. New York had a lot of people in it that were very pro-Southern. They were very angry at what had happened. And of course, the South would have fallen a long time earlier if it hadn't been for the New York draft riots, which took place just after the Battle of Gettysburg. Meade wanted, he had Lee trapped with the remnants of the Army of Northern Virginia, and he would have gone after Lee, but Meade would not move against Lee without having at least a 3-1 advantage of numbers. And with the draft riots in New York, he had to send a third of his army up. So he kind of backed away, and Lee managed to escape into Northern Virginia. And that's why the war went on after the Battle of Gettysburg. So New York has its moments.
Yes. And you have some connection. You mentioned Richmond already as well. Did you live in Richmond for a long time?
Oh, I've never lived, aside from just after I was married, my husband and I moved to Connecticut, where he worked for Pratt & Whitney. Okay. But I'm afraid that John's idea of, he never took a vacation. We never had a honeymoon. John's idea of moving was sort of like, there's a tidal wave coming, so perhaps we should head west. He was not big on going anywhere. He used to take me quite fairly late in our marriage. He used to take me down to the Mosby tours that were done in the Mosby Heritage area twice a year in the summer and in the fall. And he used to grit his teeth and drive me down. But it was a day down, a day there, a day back. We didn't spend any time, anywhere. So no, I'm not one who's had a lot of travel time.
I could have sworn I read something of yours a couple of years ago, and it was I thought it alluded to the fact that you were living in Richmond or something, or maybe you were just addressing all the hellishness going on there.
Yeah, let me tell you, to address hellishness today, you need a lot more than a computer and a keyboard. You need a full-time staff.
Yes.
It's getting to the point where they're beginning to picket in hell because the things are moving. The people are moving, like they come up through the southern border. Well, they're coming up through hell. And no, I've never lived anywhere but on Long Island. Long Island, as they say.
Long Island.
Long Island. You got to put the G in there. The G at the end of long.
Okay, so you're an independent historian. How did you get into history? And the person who suggested that I interview you for my world-class podcast was Dr. Clyde Wilson. So you're
one of my favorite people.
Yes, you're moving and shaking with the big dogs. So how did this occur? This gal from New York is an independent historian, and she is a world authority on Mosby. How did you get
Well,
into this?
I don't know. There are other authorities on the gentleman, but their authorities have to do with his military career. I mean, I know a lot of it, but I don't get involved. I was never interested in the battles. I was interested in the people.
Hmm.
If I wasn't interested in someone's who they were and what they were and how they lived and what they thought, all the battles in the world, didn't interest me all that much. You win some, you lose some. But the thing is, what I just loved to read. My mother used to say that if books were drugs, I never would have made it past 13. Uh, so I loved history. I adored it. And I would pick a figure from history. And then I would read about that person. For instance, I watched the first Churchills on Masterpiece Theater. And I got involved in John Churchill. And I read everything there was from Winston Churchill's books on his ancestor to all the other books. And then I learned about that era. And I learned if it hadn't been for John Churchill, we might be speaking French rather than English. And then I got interested in William Wallace, the great Scottish hero, who was betrayed by his own people, unfortunately. And William Marshall, the great, he was a knight, a true knight, and a great man at his time. Medieval, I love the medieval stuff. And Henry Percy, Hotspur Percy. And as I say, and one day I remembered when I was very young, when they came out with the Grey Ghost television series, back in was it the 50s? Yeah. They were starting to rev up for the centennial of the Civil War. And I watched that, and I just, there was something about the man that I loved. I loved anybody that fought more with his brain than with force. He was so clever. Oh, when he was so clever. So when I came back to him, I started to look for newspaper articles, and that's what started this whole thing with the book. And it was doing well. I would have to go to the library and pick up microfilm and look through these newspapers. I'm telling you, my eyes began to feel like those slot machines. So I learned about that, but every one of these had to be transcribed from what I got them. I bought papers, and I would have to transcribe the article. And then, unfortunately, I don't know whether God had it against me for something, but the Library of Congress opened its newspaper files to the internet. And there went vacuuming and washing and cleaning. And I was day after day after day on the internet. Oh my goodness, did I, and then you have to have all those words. I'm not good technologically. You had to have the what do they call them? Words that you could pick up when you put that one of those words down as a name to it. A word that if you put that in the thing, it finds that.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
The search engine, just searching, is that what you mean?
well, if you want to search for something and let's say you want to find out about, let's say, Princess Diana.
Mm-hmm.
Diana, you have to put Princess Diana. That's the word that they'll pick up when it goes through.
Yeah, the keyword. Yeah.
Keyword. There we are. I knew it right sooner or later. And for one thing, the man's name was spelled several different ways. Mosby was the name, the way it was spelled. Moseby because it was pronounced with the long O.
Mosby. Okay.
So in fact, one gentleman who wrote an article, a northern gentleman after the war, spoke about Mosby, and he said, he actually put in parentheses, pronounced Moseby, Mosby, as opposed to Mosby. If you put his name in your thing in the car, it comes out to Mosby, because it doesn't have the E. So it's Mosley, Mosby. Oh dear God. It was all over the place. And of course that meant I had to put all those keywords in to find him.
Right.
And it went on and on and on. And I think over 7,000 articles, and they all had to be transcribed. And I'm saying to myself, this is a lot of work. And then I would get something interesting and I'd go back and I'd look. And then, of course, in 2013, my husband passed away. And I had, I used this. And one of the things I did learn about the man early on when I was quite young, that he died to the day and almost the hour that I was born, 25 years later.
Wow.
He died on the 30th of May at around 9 o'clock in the morning in 1916. And I was born on the 30th of May around 9 o'clock in the morning, 1941.
Wow.
And I thought that was just odd. I don't know. Maybe if you come from a Celtic family, all these things are rather odd, you know. So I felt a kinship to this man. But of course, I believed all the nonsense. I believed all the stories that he was, Pat Jones, Virgil Carrington Jones. He didn't like Mosby after the war because I had a friend, he became a Republican. I said he was a Henry Clay Whig before the war. His father chose a Boston abolitionist as a tutor for his daughters. I said he was not, he had more in common politically with Abraham Lincoln than he did with Jefferson Davis. I said, why do you find that so odd? And of course, all the things they said about it, they hated him in the North, they hated him in the South. And he was this and he was that. He was senile and I'm reading all these things about the things he did and the people he spoke to and the people he spoke with when he was an old man. When he went up to give a lecture in Boston, somebody told him about a Black Union soldier who'd lost his pension, an elderly man who was quite ill and suffering. He went back down to Washington and looked in the records and had the thing changed. And this man not only got his pension back, but he got all his back pay. So he didn't die alone and with nothing. Now, he didn't have to do that. This was, one, he was Black, you know. Two, he was a Union soldier, but he did it because it was the right thing to do. And that's how he lived his life. He followed Socrates. He was baptized, of course, as a child, but he was not into churches, and his wife was a very, very, very strict Catholic, really, really. In fact, she brought two of his sisters into a nunnery, believe it or not. And he followed Socrates, and Socrates, the worst, the thing you had to worry about with Socrates was not dying, but doing the wrong thing. And that's how he lived his life. And they'd say, well, you murdered this one. And he said, it's not only an impossibility because I wasn't there, but it's a moral impossibility. And when the people that General Grant, in the end, loved him because he was a good man. He was not like so many others. He didn't do the easy thing. In fact, he was crucified when he did work for the government because he did the right thing. You can't do the right thing then any more than you can do the right thing now. He found corruption in China. He tried to solve it, couldn't, because the Department of State ignored him. So he sent it to the newspapers. And then they couldn't ignore him anymore. When he lost his position with the Southern Pacific Railroad after the death of the man who had supported him, he was sent by Teddy Roosevelt, sent to Nebraska and the western states to find the cattle kings who had fenced off the public lands. They could graze on the public lands, but they couldn't fence them in. And they did. And when Roosevelt had to choose between the support of those states for his presidential run and getting rid of Mosby, he got rid of Mosby. And as I put in the book, this was proof that he would rather be president than write. And then the same thing happened with the Department of Justice. He found lawyers that were stealing from the Indians. And when he tried to stop it, he got a telegram from his brother-in-law, Russell, from the Department of Justice, saying that this very, very wealthy law firm should get, what did he call it? A square deal, And he said, oh, if they get a square deal, they'll go to jail. So they took him off everything, and he was eventually removed because he was senile. He was no more senile than, well, I'm more senile, actually. And the only reason we know of it today is because the indictments against these lawyers were dropped. And I showed my friend, well, they dropped the indictments. That means that, no. I said, here's why they were dropped. The attorney, the district attorney who had the indictments, was told by Washington to drop them. And he said, no, these people are guilty. $3 million they were stealing from $3 million those days from the Indians. They removed him from office for 15 minutes, put somebody else into his office for 15 minutes, dropped the indictments, and then put him back in. I said, does this sound to you like Mosby had the problem?
Right.
Hello? But everybody, but really they loved to believe all these terrible things about the man. And when I wrote that book, I said, he said time would vindicate him. It was 100 years to 2016. He died in 1916, 100 years. And I said, time, hopefully, if anybody reads this book, time will vindicate him, because he did not do all these things that he was accused of doing, or that he hated this one, he hated that one. And the more I learned about it, that's why I wrote the book. I wasn't going to write a book. What do I know about writing a book? I mean, I could write articles. Yeah, I'm a reasonably decent person with words.
I would disagree with you, Val. Your writing is extremely powerful, and I'm pretty picky about writers.
Well, thank you. There's nothing like a compliment, because they get so few of them. I write them down at the time because I'm going to be buried with it. I had a compliment on May the 3rd, 1962.
Well, I'm glad we're recording this compliment. Well, so the book she's referring to, y'all, is was called 1,000 Points of Truth, but now it is being published by Shotwell, correct? Yes. Shotwell Publishing, and it's called Colonel John Singleton Mosby in the News, 1862 to 1916, by V.P. Hughes. She writes it under her maiden name. Yeah, maiden name.
I haven't been a maiden in a whole long time.
So I'll put a link to that when this podcast comes out, so people can buy it.
Well, the reason the whole thing came out with the 1,000 Points of Truth was when I was looking at the newspapers. You couldn't put photographs in newspapers years ago. You could put etchings, art, yes, but you couldn't. You could put photographs in magazines and books because you had to do the text aside from the photographs. You couldn't do it with a newspaper. Then they came up with this process with the little ditty dots. You remember when we were kids, you'd look at it with a magnifying glass and you'd see all the little dots. And the more I got these newspaper articles, they were never, I think there was one that was accurate. I think it was 4 sentences. And that's the only reason it was accurate. It didn't go any further. But nonetheless, each one had something in it that added to who and what he was. There was another view. His enemies, even his enemies, had things to say that made you learn more about him. So I called it 1,000 Points of Truth, meaning that the more you could see, instead of, well, let's take, for instance, the famous story that my friend Dave Getz, who is a real expert on the gentleman as well. In fact, he was giving classes, I think, before the COVID nonsense came along. And apparently he was supposed to have ridden into, whether it was Leesburg or what it was, in full Confederate uniform, which was a crime, and shout, said, do something about it. And all kinds of things happened. Well, I got to the newspaper article, and what happened is one of the articles covered it. He rode into that town, and he was wearing a cape that his mother had sent to him, and had sent by the woman who had been the tutor to his sisters. Her name was Abby Southwell. And she sent it down. She sent food and all to the family because she was very fond of them. And the mother sent he was a lawyer. I mean, he had to look reasonably decent. So she sent the cloak to him, and it had the brass buttons of Massachusetts on it. Well, he rode into the town, and one of these unions saw the brass buttons. And it wasn't Confederate buttons, it was brass buttons, it was Massachusetts. And they were going to cut them off this cloak. Now, you have to understand, these people were impoverished. They didn't have buttons. They would strip people naked to take the buttons off if they wore something that had a button they didn't like. I mean, we have no idea what the people of the South suffered. None at all. So he decided that, he didn't want to make a fuss. He didn't want to cause trouble. So he was going to leave. Well, they weren't going to let him leave. Well, he left anyway. And he hid behind a huge hay bale. And then when they came, he moved off, and they attacked the hay bale, and they were shooting at it and jumping up and down on it. And he, all the way up on the hill, got a big charge out of that. He laughed and he whistled at them, and they were very angry. So that was the story. And he said to the reporter, he said, I didn't know that the state symbol of Massachusetts was disloyal. Well, my friend, I tell him this, and he said, it's not it's not the story that everybody knows, and everybody. He says, oh, we'll have to agree to disagree. I said, David, I said, in one of these articles, he is quoted. This is not some reporter's understanding. He is quoted. I said, you can't agree to disagree when the man you're talking about is quoted as saying something. But it was so much fun to believe all the terrible things.
Mm-hmm.
I dislike the understanding that you can make reality what you want it to be because you want it to be. I'd like to be tall and slender and wealthy and gorgeous. Actually, that's not possible. All the desire in the world is not going to make it so. So, I mean, you have to, I'm waiting for all these idiot people to decide that they can fly. Just let me know so I can stay inside. Jump off buildings. Let me stay inside so I don't get killed. But the whole point is that, well, this isn't what we want to believe. Hello? What? When I wrote this, I thought all these people who love John Mosby would be thrilled to find out that he wasn't bad-tempered, senile, wretched, horrible, awful, that he was a decent, gentle man who was always kindly, who was always honest, and was a great lawyer. They said that he was a terrible lawyer. And one Supreme Court justice said that he'd never seen a case so well presented. He didn't even have to go to his people to look up anything. It was all right there for him. I said, why do you believe the worst possible thing about this man if you like this man? I'm giving you the poop, as they used to say. This is the truth. He was a good man. He was a kindly man. He did things when he had nothing he would give. For instance, when he went north, he'd already been fired. He was fired. He had $40 in his pocket. That was it. And no income. And he went up there and he did his lectures for a charity for taking care of boys on the street. So he didn't even gain anything for that. But, it just, I don't know, it must be a modern thing, the desire to keep, even when one learns that it's wrong, it's incorrect, you want to keep it anyway. Why?
Yeah, and these were people that you were saying were fans of his.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Was
absolutely.
The myth was more interesting when from what I'm learning about him from you and from reading some of your stuff, that's really interesting.
You go look at all of his biographers, starting with Virgil Carrington Jones. The end of the book is a whole list of things that everybody has said, that he made his own legend, that he wrote about it all the time. He spoke to the newspapers about it. People would say to him, you read this, Colonel Mosby doesn't speak about what happened during the war. He never mentions these things. Hello? That you have that idiot McPherson who said that he never took part in a major battle. Well, perhaps he never took part in a major battle, but it was because of John Mosby and 35 men. He kept over 2,000 Union cavalry away from the Battle of Brandy Station, the biggest cavalry battle on the continent. Because he was there with 35 men, that's all. They wouldn't allow the cavalry general there, that cavalry general, to send his 4,200 troops. And if they had gone, according to the book, what was it? The Wizards of the Saddle. That was Mosby and Morgan and Forrest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he said if they had gone, Stuart might have been killed and his cavalry cut up. And Lee, this was early on in the war, Lee could have missed his whole cavalry. But because of those 35 men, that's all they were, 35 men. They were so terrified of him that they wouldn't let them go. He sent a lock of his hair to Abraham Lincoln and told him he was going to be in the next week to get a lock in return. And Lincoln sent him one and said, don't bother.
Oh, man. So he's known as the Gray Ghost.
No, he never was. He never was. He never heard that until after the war. But he became eventually known as that.
So tell people what that means, even if that was not his nickname during the war. What does that mean?
Well, apparently, according to what I can find out, a lot of this is legend. You want to understand. Very few of this. We don't know we're going to be involved in history until we're long dead. We can't do anything about it. But apparently, after something Mosby did, after he took Stoughton at a Fairfax courthouse surrounded by his army, they were all terrified that he was going to come in. They used to take the planks off the chain bridge every night to keep he and his men from coming into Washington.
Wow.
So Lincoln kept meeting these people in conference in the halls in the White House because they were so terrified. And he said, gentlemen, do you think that this man is a ghost, a gray ghost who's just going to pop up? And that's apparently where the name came from, though I don't think he ever heard it.
Okay.
But he was also called the Fox of Fauquier, as Lee was called, the Gray Fox, and the Wolf of Piedmont, which is a little bit more, what shall we say, difficult, a little bit more predatory. Wolves are more predatory than foxes. Foxes are quick, but he was quite he used to do some interesting things. One of the stories was he went into, I don't know who it was a woman's house, and they were there, and his men were outside. What he was doing, I don't know. He was inside, and he suddenly the Yankees were upon them, and the other group just left. What were they going to do? They weren't going to sit there and get killed. He was still inside the house, so they were trying to figure out where he could go. So she put him in this huge grandfather clock. He was a little man. He was about 5'6" or 5", and he was very slender. So they put him in the clock, closed the clock, and they came in looking for him, and his hat was there. So they looked all over. And of course, as he wrote himself, the dust was starting to get into his nose, and he knew he was going to sneeze. And if he sneezed, they would turn around and, fire at the clock. He was dead. So at the last minute, as he sneezed, he grabbed the chimes and all, and he shook them, and they made a terrible noise. And she looks up and says, I've got to get that clock fixed.
Nice.
Oh, and the night he was in the Hathaway house with his wife and 2 children, and somebody had seen him go, I guess, and they came in, and they were looking for him. They went all through the house, and she's in bed, and the Colonel Boyd, they couldn't find him anywhere. And it was a cold night. And they took his horse and they left. They were very unhappy. There was a big tree. You could still see the picture of it. And the branch was leaning against a window in the upper bedroom. And he, probably dressed in little or nothing at all, stepped out onto the branch and stayed up there. They looked up. And they leave, and he comes back in and gets into bed with her. Oh, one of the reasons they did hate him, they really hated him, because, as he said, he thought they hated him because he made them lose more sleep than anything else, because they'd be going to sleep and they'd attack.
Right.
but he had it's, I don't know whether it's a true story. Some of these stories are what they call apocryphal, as you know. But he had a pair of pistols. He liked the revolver. He got rid of the saber. He said it was too noisy. And some of his men had rifles, but most of his men had the revolvers. And he had a beautiful holster set, beautifully made. And it was made by a Union soldier whom he found after a battle lying abandoned by his own people, wounded. And he took him to a house and he pressed the people there, Southern people, to take care of this young man.
Wow.
And during his, as he was recovering, he made this set for him. That whether that is a true story or it's an apocryphal story, I cannot tell. But it wouldn't surprise me at all, because he was when it came to be wounded, as soon as somebody was wounded or a prisoner, he was a very different. He'd kill you during the battle, absolutely. But once, well, the way you know that is because after the war, many of the best friends he had were men he had captured during the war. That doesn't happen when you're cruel.
Right.
Just doesn't.
Now
But
you keep going. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that he was the only man that Grant ordered hanged without trial if he were captured. They never caught him. Never. They tried.
So the nickname is fitting, and you were saying that he made people lose sleep because he was a guerrilla fighter.
Well, he didn't exactly hate the word guerrilla.
Okay.
He said it means small war, and he said that that's what he did. His idea was that he would provide a much greater force for the Confederacy behind the lines of the enemy. He said, my few men, and I think the most he ever had at one time fighting with him was like 300 or 400 men. The biggest thing he ever did was the wagon train raid at Berryville, and he had 300 men with him, and that was a riot. They had a little cannon. They called them. They were very small. They said they were too big for a rifle. They wouldn't fit in your belt. But they were little teeny cannons, and they brought them, and one of them broke. So they had the other one, and they were ready to attack the back of this huge wagon train of Sheridan's. And it was a foggy morning. You couldn't see much of anything. So they were up on a hill. And he says, everybody was ready to attack. Everybody was ready. And the signal would be a firing of the cannon into the camp. Well, they put the cannon down on a yellow jacket nest. And he's watching them while they're all waving their arms and running away from the gun. And he said, what are you doing? That's our signal. And of course, when they all ran away, the nearest thing to the cannon and the bees was him.
Right.
He said suddenly the whole world was yellow jackets. And one of his men came with a hat and waved the hat and moved the cannon. And he said, they went back into the ground, and then the battle started. But he said it was funny, not at the time, but later on when he wrote about it. And in fact, he wrote an article for a children's thing where that's what happened. But he did win the battle. He took 600 head of cattle, and oh my God. But in the children's story, because he didn't want to carry the war on, he allowed himself to be driven away rather than have them think that he had been successful as a Confederate. So
wow.
He loved children. He loved his children. He adored his children. He called them his Tillins. He had 2 of them before he went to war. His daughter, May, who was the oldest, and his son, Beverly, named after his wife's father, Beverly Clark. Yes, he was an amazing man. And in fact, I know he was amazing for one reason. I was born into the Catholic Church, and I remember when I was young, a Catholic girl could not marry a non-Catholic boy. You just didn't. It wasn't done. And his wife was very, very Catholic. Pauline, all of the daughters had the name Mary. She was Mariah Pauline Clark. And she brought him home, and they went to see the priest. And if the priest had said to her no, she would not have married.
Mhm.
But the priest saw something in him. And eventually, just before he died, he was brought into the church. And people say, that never happened, that never happened. He was buried in a Catholic ceremony. You can't be buried in a Catholic ceremony if you're not in the Catholic Church.
Right.
His wife died very young. His life after the war, I mean, it would have been better if he, that's what Jones said. It would have been better if he died when he was so severely wounded in December of 1864. Probably would have been better for him. But he stuck to his guns. He did what he thought was right at all times. And when he was wrong, he said he was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things I point out in the book, that when he said was going on in China, he said that he said if he read it wrong, he made an egregious ass of himself and deserved to be removed. And I said, you have to remember that many of the terrible things that happen don't happen because people are terrible. It's because good men refuse to acknowledge when they're wrong.
Correct.
And he was willing to acknowledge when he was wrong. And he did.
Explain some more about what people might see as him being a paradox. He had these Whig political beliefs, you had said maybe he believed more ideologically with Lincoln as opposed to Jefferson Davis, but he was a Confederate.
He was a Virginian,
right.
First and foremost. And if Virginia had stayed in the Union, he would have fought, as he said, he would have fought for the North. However, 10 minutes after the fight, he would have shot several of his officers, seeing what they were doing.
Yeah.
He always would assume that you were waging war properly. He knew he knew, he used to say that the wars he knew about were the Peloponnesian Wars. Now, they're not much, that you can go back in the Peloponnesian Wars to see how to do it today. But he firmly believed that there were codes of war. I wrote about this. I think it's still available. There's a Southern group, a Southern store that has it. I'm trying to remember the name of it. My friend and I were involved in producing a video that was professionally done, not amateur, called Searching for Lincoln. And I wrote 3 parts of it. He wrote Lincoln and Slavery. I wrote Lincoln and the Constitution, Lincoln and Total War. And it was I guess that was Lincoln, the Constitution, Lincoln and Total War. And and also wrote the beginning and the end of it. But in the Constitution, Lincoln had a very different idea. And this was the problem. The whole war was about, were you for Locke or were you for Hobbes? Locke was a believer in the kind of government the founders wanted. Hobbes was a believer. Locke believed that men were a group, that we were together. Hobbes believed that everybody was himself. And if you didn't have a strong force keeping order, we'd kill each other. Mm-hmm. That's why Lincoln was terrified about the war. That if they, this would cause chaos. Locke, on the other hand, believed, as did Jefferson and all the others, that you sat down with your fellows and you worked things out, and if you didn't get away too much, then you made whatever you had to do to make it work. Mosby loved Virginia. He was a Virginian. He called it his mother. And he would not have gone, if she had stayed in the Union, he would have stayed with her. But I don't think he would have put up with the kind of war crimes that were committed. He admitted later on, he didn't like to admit it because he was trying to consign all the evils to the past, to oblivion, to get rid of them so that the country could be one again. But even in the end, that last thing that he said about Troy, if Troy could have been saved by this right hand, it would have been saved. And I really said that those words that he says at the end of his life, they're in his posthumously published memoirs, They're in the speeches that he ended any number of things with. I think that he, after working for the government and seeing the corruption that went on, not just with the Democrats or the Republicans, but the corruption and the power. He did, for instance, during the strike, the Pullman strike. You're getting my brain working here. The Pullman strike, he wrote that in California, the strikers threatened, and the California National Guard did nothing. And he was saying that that's why you need a strong government. And I put in the book, John, you're forgetting. After the end of the war, there were no more strong state governments. And it wasn't just the South. Every state government lost its sovereignty. At one roundtable discussion, we had a gentleman come in. He was a lieutenant in the police force, and he thought he was a constitutional scholar. And everybody in my roundtable, when I used to go, they used to look around. Oh, there she is. Oh, God, there she is. Oh, 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 oh. Yeah. And I'm sitting there, and they're saying, it's not going to be a good night. And I said to him, he was talking about, the United States. I said, did you look at the Constitution? Did you look at the thing that it was written? The U in United is small, lowercase. It's not a name. It's not the United States of America. It's the United States of America. I said, when you saw the Treaty of Paris, and there's two of them, one is the Spanish-American War, the Great Britain signed a peace treaty with each individual colony. Didn't sign it with a group. There was no group. We signed it with Virginia, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania. These were, as you would have signed it with France and Spain and Portugal, as individual countries. There was no, Lincoln said, it was a national government. The word government doesn't even appear in the Constitution.
So
and I love all these wonderful conservatives talking for a return to the Constitution. Patrick Henry despised the Constitution. He said, this is just the beginning of an all-powerful central government with a standing army.
mm-hmm.
Guess what? Patrick was right. Ego me dixi vobis, I told you so. He knew it was coming. But of course, everybody figured, oh, that's really not going to happen. And that's the whole business of this idiocy of secession. Well, 3 states went, everybody thinks, oh, it was love. The Constitution was immediately grabbed. And no, 3 states went home, Virginia, Rhode Island, and New York, 2 northern states.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody said, what? Remember, at that time, there was no Bill of Rights. It hadn't been put in. Those are the first 10 amendments. So those 3 states came back with what they called secession documents in their ratification documents, which said, if we don't like what's going on, for the happiness, the benefit of our people, Virginia did it better. They had better writers. We are going to reassume what we have given to the central government, to the federal government. We are reassuming that. Now, as I said that day to the gentleman, I said, you must understand, I'm sure, and you do understand as a legal man, that the Constitution was a contract, a compact. And if you have a contract, nobody in that contract has more or less rights than all the other signatories. So when those 3 states put those secession in their ratification documents, and they were accepted, everybody had the right. It wasn't limited. Everybody had the right. And of course, New England did that during the war, would you believe, during the War of 1812. They were so PO'd because they were losing money, because they worked with Great Britain, and of course, as somebody pointed out, The war was about the sailors being taken from American ships, and most of those ships came from New England, you know, and they were having problems. And they were thinking about seceding. And one gentleman said to me, well, they voted against it. I said, yeah, they voted against it, but they voted. And there was a Southerner, Monroe, in the White House at the time. Where did he write down that if you do this, I'm going to send an army up and burn your houses and your towns? He said nothing, because that was their right. In fact, it's just too damn bad they didn't go. We probably wouldn't have had a civil war, because the whole country became New England.
Right.
Everybody thought New England was crazy. People in Pennsylvania thought they were all nuts. They thought it was the water. But eventually, all the terrible things that come from the burned out district in New York, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Shakers, all of these people, they were from Boston and all, coming down into that area of New York. That's where Ichabod Crane comes from, Washington Irving. Ichabod Crane was the typical Yankee, minding everybody's business and telling you how wrong you were. But eventually, by the time the middle of the 19th century came to pass, everybody was New England except for the South.
Right.
And by the way, they hated blacks in the North. Hated. In the South, you had a hierarchical understanding of the relationship, with whites on the top, of course. But one Northern gentleman wrote in something to a letter. He said, this nigger, and that's exactly what he called him in the letter. That's a quote, people. Went across the road and shook hands with a white man. And he was horrified that the white man would shake hands with him. How many black slaves died protecting their masters' families when the Yankees came, when Sherman came? How many of them died? Now, I mean, slavery was no fun. And as Thomas Jefferson said, you know, who hated slavery, what are we going to do with the Negro? There were so many of them. It was a Holocaust. They were dying. They were like 5 million by the time of it. And they couldn't go north. They weren't allowed. They weren't permitted. The black codes, including Lincoln's, Illinois, they couldn't go there. They used to dig them up out of the cemeteries, the white cemeteries, dig their bodies. So, I mean, I don't want to hear how wonderful the North was to them. And of course, who brought them here? It was not those. No slave ship ever sailed from the South. Molasses to rum to slaves. And it was all New England and New York.
Right.
But then again, we forget all that now, don't we? It's so convenient.
Well, and true history is so, you had used the word, how I guess the mainstream narrative is fun for people, but it's so unfun, really. It's boring. Everything is just one dimensional. There's no getting to know the people. Everything's, I guess, kind of like monolithic or whatever, just very.
But you have to be very careful when you're sustaining a lie.
Right.
That you have to remember. When you're sustaining a lie, you can't get creative.
Right.
If you're trying to keep a lie accurately on board, for instance, they never say anything about the fact that all of the blacks in Africa were sold by blacks, not by whites.
Right.
You'd think that these New England sailors went down and into the jungle and captured these poor people running around, and all you would have had, if that had actually happened, the only thing would have happened is empty ships and very fat lions.
Right. Well, wasn't it the movie Roots that really put that forward, that everybody was just happy getting along? Right?
Yes,
just like the Native Americans, and then until.
Oh yeah, the Native Americans, they loved each other, the Native Americans. Geez, Christmas. I mean, and of course, let's face it, over time, people displace other people. That's what happens. And frankly, as somebody said, really pointed out, the only race in the world that ever cared about ending slavery was the white. The Chinese didn't care. Well, the Chinese, all they had was Chinese, you know. I told my daughter once that every fourth person in the world is Chinese, and she came in a few hours later and said, "You're a liar. I didn't see one Chinese out there." No, 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 no. We're talking about okay. Children are, let me tell you, you will never have a big head if you have children. You might have, other things will be big, but not your head.
That's right.
Not your head. No, it's and I joined one group when I first started on the internet. And I don't know what I said, but oh my God, you would think that I was calling for the murder of virgins and their sacrificial, their hearts. And I think I said something about Lincoln. And, it was a true thing, that Lincoln didn't like black, didn't like them at all, wanted them gone. It was in the colonization thing. And week before he was assassinated, he was working with the General Butler to move them into Panama to dig the canal.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's bust the biggest myth. Let's bust the biggest myth. Lost cause. It has become an ad hominem, like climate denier, election denier, Holocaust denier, whatever. It's like lost cause. All somebody has to do is say you're a lost causer, and a lot of people just close their ears and their brains. What do you think about the lost cause? I personally think the cause is very much still relevant.
Well, the point is that if you're talking about the war, this is why Mosby wanted very much to stop everything depending on the war. In the South, everything that came up was about the war. And he says, you're never going to get anywhere doing that, because you've already signed an agreement that you will not raise arms against the national government anymore.
Right.
So, I mean, what are you going to prove here?
Right.
He said, by using the war, the South lost any hope of getting the rest of the country to look at whatever the problem was, apart from the war. That's what he had, the problem he had with the war. If you continued to use the war as the only thing that you're focusing on, the rest of the country was going on without the South.
Right.
I mean, instead of looking around and trying to, as he wanted them to look at policies that help their state, their people. And if that included, working with somebody in the North, fine. But when it all came back to you couldn't work with that person because he was this or that or the other thing, he just felt his idea was that to do something that cut your own throat was stupid. There was so many things. And by the way, early on after the war, there were a lot of people in the North who knew perfectly well what had happened. Like, for instance, that Mr. Boate, who wrote Boate, who wrote to the Times about what happened in Andersonville. And he said it was not the Southerners. They ate the same food we did. He said it was our own people who left us there, and didn't even, Colonel Old, who was responsible for exchanging prisoners all through the war, he said to them, my God, are you people monsters? They asked for medicine and food for their own prisoners, not for anybody in the South, for their own prisoners. And they refused to give it to them. And they refused to give it to them. And when Wirtz was tried and eventually hanged, many prisoners from Andersonville wanted to come and testify for him. They wouldn't let them. They only had people who'd never been in Andersonville who testified that they saw him shoot prisoners. And the night before he was hanged, he was offered that he would be released if he said that Jefferson Davis and the Confederate government had tried to kill prisoners, and he wouldn't do it. So, I mean, there were a lot of Northerners, if they had done it at the time, and reached out to these people who had been understood what had happened. Not everybody was a Sherman or a Sheridan, thank God. But it's very hard. I mean, the Southern people were very proud people, and as well they should have been. But they saw things happen that they didn't believe could have happened at the hands of fellow Americans. These are Americans. Hello. Somebody said that to Lee once, that the Americans were, and he said, sir, I am an American.
Right.
So, I mean, but the lost cause later on, when they started to bring out all these true facts about what had happened and who did what, that's when they came up with just destroying the entire narrative by calling it the lost cause. That's
Right.
easy to do because people don't think. God knows people don't think. I sometimes wonder, think. My mother used to say that. Are you thinking, Valerie? Are you thinking? Tick, 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 tick.
Well, that's one of the reasons I love your writing is you use history and not just the 4 years of the war, but all of history to, you're really pointing out that the cause is not lost because you had said earlier, every state lost its sovereignty. All around us, we have, America's like a giant round peg and we're trying to fit it, into a square slot, or I guess it's a square peg into a round hole, right? And nobody's happy and everybody's miserable and nobody likes centralization unless they get rich off of it and have the power, but that's not most Americans.
Well, I tell you, I just found something that was written by a gentleman. He updated it in 2007, and his name is, I think it's John Christian.
Okay.
And it's not helping me because from what I have read from this, it's been over since Queen Elizabeth I.
It is America.
Everything.
Yeah.
All the things that we believe in. Yeah. I didn't realize that the center of all evil was Britain. What? Huh? Britain owns the world. They're banking. They are all connected. It's, I haven't seen a spider make this big a web. And this gentleman, he puts it, and he says that they are all, these people who do this, these New World Order people are pagans. They are worshiping. If you want to see a real proof of this, there's a thing on the opening of the 2022, what do they call it? The games, the Commonwealth Games. Jeez, come on, guys, come on. The Commonwealth Games, where the whole thing is the worship of a tremendous metal bowl. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, huh? And they're saying, this is Baal. This is the old pagan, and they're worshiping it. Young people. So, I mean, I look and I'm trying to get something said about the South because I think defense is, you can't let anything stay. But I wrote something called, Please Remove My Name. These people that are removing the names from Confederates and monuments and so forth. And I said, I know the government today. And if you look at, I said, Lee and Jackson and these men, I said, they could have not only fought with the Northern armies, Lee could have led the Northern armies. I said, but they chose not to. And I said, now when I look at this government and I look at these supposedly monuments and I said, if I were one of these men, I would send a little note, please remove my name from your whatever it is, because I do not wish to be associated with it, even in death. Even in death, take my name away, remove it, quick. I don't want to be one of your, like Camp Lejeune. Think of that. Think of those men and their families for years and years and years being poisoned, and nobody gave a damn. This is our country. Washington, he's going to ask God to remove his name from the Capitol. I wouldn't. They will remove it, of course, because not only was he a Southerner, but he was a slave owner. He was white, which is worst of all. Nobody understands what George Washington was. We really don't. But King George did. When Washington stepped down, King George said, any man who had the power he had to walk away is a great man. Now that's the King of England.
Right.
We don't know. What we are looking at today, what we are holding up as, oh dear God. in our military, our what bureaucracies, in our this thing that this gentleman wrote. He talked about what happened with all the drugs we have in this country are the result of the CIA raising money. The whole drug traffic is done through Britain and our government. And all these people in jail, all these people dying. This is not Iran. This is not Iraq. This is not Afghanistan. The Chinese War. John Mosby was the consul to China. It was sent there by President Hayes because somebody took a shot at him one day. Some brave person took a shot at him in the night because they didn't like him. So he was sent to China, and China had Hong Kong was in the hands of the British. Why? The first Opium War. Mm-hmm. Why did they want the opium? Because the British government was making billions of dollars out of opium.
Right.
We were the bad guys, you know. Hello. We look at these, the war on drugs. Yeah, it wasn't a war on drugs. It was a war for drugs.
Right.
I mean, it's bad. And then, of course, what you're seeing now is simply what happens, you know, when things get to a point where the only thing you can do is stand for the truth. And eventually you hope that in the East will come that trumpet. He's coming.
Now, you were talking about the round table you were going to, and the people were like, oh, here comes Val.
Whenever I came, here comes Val.
And I get myself in trouble sometimes too, because people can only take so much truth when it's completely demolishing their entire
they don't know how to respond to it.
Right. Because it's a bitter pill.
You've been given a narrative. Right. This happened, and 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 this happened. And that's what you've been told your whole life. And it's not unusual that you should believe that narrative.
Right.
But when I said to somebody, well, what about this? Huh? What? I said, read this. Somebody came back, I don't want to read your books.
Right.
I said, wait a minute. That book was from a historian, not a pro-Southern historian, an actual historian. You know, he was looking at the facts. Yeah, but I don't like those facts. I told how to have an argument with a liberal. You bring the things up and you say, how about point one? You agree with point one. They think about it, and they're not stupid people. They're not. And they say, yeah, you quite right. And how about point two? And you explain it to them and you show them, and they think, and they're decent people, and they say, you're right. And then you go to point three, and they have to agree too. You know, well, it's a little, but nonetheless, yeah, you got the proof. Well, then we go to four. No. What do you mean no? 1 + 2 + 3 = 4. No, it doesn't. Why doesn't it? Because I don't want 4. Oh.
Yes.
Bill Buckley said years ago that you can't debate anymore. He used to debate with the great old time liberals, true liberals. Mm-hmm. What was his name? I can't remember his name.
Was it Gore Vidal or whatever?
No. This was a philosopher like Buckley. They would debate. And he said, when you debate with a true liberal, if you make a point, he admits to it. And when he makes a point, you admit to it. Today, they throw things.
Right.
In fact, you're very careful not to make too many points because you're liable to be killed. Look at the problem Jordan Peterson has. Oh, dear God, do they hate that man? Do they hate that man? Because they can't argue with him. They can't debate him. They can't undo what he says. They can't prove him wrong. So remember when we were little kids? Well, you don't. You're younger. When we were little kids and we get into an argument, your mother wears army shoes. This was a response. You couldn't think of what else to say, so you insulted somebody's mother. That was the way children respond. Well, what we have is a toddler brain nation with people who should know better acting as if they're two. We also have a society that is based upon envy and the feeling of entitlement. And boy, if that doesn't destroy your culture, I don't know what will. It's the same thing, you know, with the blacks. You got black millionaires, billionaires, these, and they're never happy. Why aren't they happy? Because the one thing they want more than anything else is to be white. And that Michael Jackson did it. Wasn't easy, but he did it. But this is the problem, you know, like you want to be the whole gender nonsense is a matter of you tell a child that really he wants to be a girl, or you tell a girl that really she wants to be. No, they don't. These are adults. Well, they're not adults, really. I don't know what they are, but they poison the minds of children, and then they destroy their bodies. And it's horrible. I mean, it's horrible. If we don't put a stop to it, there will be no stop to it. We will go down the tubes. And I keep looking to the West with hope. Yellowstone. Yellowstone will stop everything. Yellowstone is an extinction level event. It would plunge this world into an ice age. That's how big it is. I mean, it would pretty much kill everything. It would certainly, they want to stop farming. Yellowstone will do it for them. Because they don't intend to stop eating. They want you to stop eating.
Correct.
I don't know. I put my hands up and say, Lord, you know, anytime, anytime.
So
just give me a moment's notice.
I believe it's in the preface to your book, when your Mosby book, and you say that he was a true hero who struggled not just against the armed might of a powerful enemy, but against the forces of political, moral, and ethical chaos. Again, that's not a lost cause. That's exactly what you just described, right? You know?
Yes, and he did it. He had people who were with him. But I mean, his second son, his namesake son, died hating him. Because, of course, all the things that happened after the war, this child bore his name. And they weren't going to fight with Mosby. Oh, dear me, no. He was too damn good a shot. So they picked on his. He had to send his two older children to Canada, to a Catholic school. And that's how. These were his people. These were the people, as he said, that he spilled his blood for, and his youth. The part of his life that he did it for them, and this was their answer because they didn't like or they didn't understand what he did, or why he did it. They said that he did it for preference. He did it for money.
He
lost everything.
Join the Republicans? Is that what you mean?
No, that came eventually. But first
Okay.
He supported Grant in 72.
Okay.
And he supported Grant in 72 because the Democrats, now Mosby at the time was a member of the Conservative Party. That was the Democrat Party in Virginia, but they didn't call themselves Democrats. They called themselves conservatives. He was a member of that party. He would never join the Republican Party in Virginia because he considered it a Reconstruction Party. It was full of, scalawags and carpetbaggers and freedmen and just stealing all that wasn't nailed down. But when 72 came along, Grant was running for his second term, and the Democratic Party put up, of all things, Horace Greeley. Now, Horace Greeley was the rabbitest of the rabbitest of the rabbitest of the radical Republicans. Everything that they hated Grant for as a president enforcing, every law, was written by Greeley. So Mosby said no. I mean, at least in Grant, he didn't humiliate at Appomattox. He let Lee go, and he gave people their to go home, and he said he was a true soldier. Greeley, he hated Greeley, but he told Grant when he went to see him. He was brought by one of the senators. He said, if the Democrats run a Democratic candidate, he said, I will vote for that candidate, though he was, a Democrat in name only. But he said, if they run Greeley, I will vote for you. And he said, not only will I vote for you, but I will campaign for you. And he did. And Grant took Virginia.
Wow.
And then he went, the next election was in the state, and he went for conservative Kemper. Now, what Mosby wanted to, Mosby was wrong, I will say this. He was wrong in the belief that the rest of the Republican Party in the North would not have anything against the whites in the South. He felt that the government with the blacks was, well, all you have to do is look at it today. Is it indifferent in Detroit, Birmingham, Memphis? No. So it was terrible in the South. So he figured that the whites in the North, the white Republicans, would join with the Southern whites and replace, putting the white man back in charge where he belonged. But he was wrong. Many of the Republican whites in the North despised the people of the South, and he didn't know that, which was not a good thing, because he acted on that. And when Grant won his election and Kemper won his election, he tried to bring the two of them together, at least in a general understanding that the Virginia government would work with the national government to smooth things out and make sure. Well, they found that Kemper was, and they hated Mosby for Grant in the first place, and they killed him. They destroyed him. Kemper was, Kemper was afraid, and Mosby said that he hated him after that he just abandoned him. And he said, but after many years of dealing with the weaknesses of people, he was now not so angry as he once was. But his efforts to help, and he said they didn't work. And he said what happened to him happened to all the people in the past who had tried to do the right thing and had been defeated, like who wrote Don Quixote. Cervantes was one of them. All of these good people who tried to do the right thing and were defeated, they were castigated, they were humiliated, and he was one of them. So
this reminds me of what we had a lengthy email correspondence getting this set up. And I reached out to you, saying Clyde Wilson suggested that we chat, and you tagged him on your reply. And it just made me love you even more, because you said, I'm tagging Dr. Wilson because true evil is everywhere and our enemies are often very credible. And we, alas, are often far too naive, so you just because I was saying, I knew him.
You never know. I mean, for one thing, John Mosby was naive. And
right.
One of the things I point out, one of his weaknesses was, for instance, he believed he thought that Hayes would be the reformer he said he would. And that's when he said that the punishing the only reformer who's actually reforming anything.
Right.
And he thought that Teddy Roosevelt would support him with the cattlemen in Nebraska, but Roosevelt chose, and took him away. And of course, every time this happened, the only person that got crucified was John Mosby. That's why I did the Latin and the poetry at the beginning of each chapter, because he did everything in Latin, and he was, I think the man had something that we would call today a photographic memory. I think he could read something and recall, because he could.
Wow.
He could remember. They said he was a walking dictionary of the classics. I can't remember what I ate for breakfast this morning, unless I ate twice in a row. But he did believe in people. And when he was at that one time, just after when he had the terrible accident, where he was fortunate to survive that. How he survived it, I don't know. But he thought that the outpouring of affection, and he thought that, maybe it was changing. Maybe that the people who hated him, were maybe in the North not so, but in the South, he hoped. And then they turned around the next year, and he said, that's when he wrote that all Virginia ever did to me was put me in the Albemarle jail. And this was the state he called his mother.
Right.
He became very bitter, and I can understand that, because every time this went on, they said, well, you did it for money. You did it for. He was driven to poverty. He lost everything, including his wife. I mean, in one period of time, after all these terrible things happened, The next year, his wife, her last pregnancy, she died, and the child died 12 days later.
Oh.
He had already buried an 18-month-old the year before, and his mother had put a tombstone up, gone to play with the angels. This was his life. The people he loved, the people he supported, the people he and they even turned, that's what they started to do. They then turned, not so much the Northerners, they always were against the way he waged war, but the Southerners then started to make of his nothing. It was nothing. He was nothing but a horse thief and these were the people he was willing to die for,
Right.
and was perhaps the most successful damn Confederate leader that they had.
Were you the are you the former editor of the Southern Cavalry Review?
Yes, Southern Cavalry Review. Oh,
Okay.
and I lost that little thing because of what we're talking about now. When the sesquicentennial came, that word is difficult. That really
It is.
They were starting with all this garbage, of the monuments and the flags and the whole 9 yards. And I started to figure, well, we're talking about this anniversary of the war. And it says in the motto of the Stuart-Mosby Historical Society to history, history. So let's give them some history. So I gave them the history of Fort Sumter, which they're all like, what? The first act of war in the so-called Civil War, which wasn't, was done by Major Anderson. Major Anderson was the commander of the troops at Fort Moultrie in Charleston. Moultrie was a land-based fort. It was for the incoming of tariffs and things like that. Sumter had reverted to South Carolina. And in Sumter, there were people trying to bring it back. It was in pretty bad shape. This was Christmas Eve. Now, Anderson and his men were being fed. South Carolina had already seceded from the Union, but efforts were being made to sort out this business of what were federal forts on Southern soil. Moultrie was still a federal fort, and these men were invited to dinner. I mean, this was not a warlike nature. Anderson, not at his own, I can't believe that any, was he captain or colonel or something like that, but I can't believe that any lower officer would do this on his own. He had to have directions from his superiors. Christmas Eve, he cuts down the flagpole in Moultrie so the Confederate flag cannot be raised. He spikes the guns in Moultrie. He removes the munitions. He takes his men by boat out of Moultrie across to Sumter, where there's nothing but civil workers, He enters that, he removes the civilian workers at the point of a bayonet into boats to send them, and he then takes charge of Sumter. Because Sumter is in the middle of the water. You can't march into Sumter. Meanwhile, things have been arranged for Sumter. I did a pamphlet on it. All the ships ready to go to Sumter with troops and supplies and so forth. Now, meanwhile, you have to remember that the president at this particular time is Buchanan, not Lincoln. That's not until March. Buchanan has signed an agreement with South Carolina to do nothing, not to raise a hand about anything until they can perhaps figure out what to do. Now, Buchanan, who hated secession, didn't want secession, told his Attorney General, Jeremiah Black, and I have this information too, to find him a constitutional remedy to secession and to force the states, the cotton states, back into the Union. Jeremiah Black was a brilliant man. He went and he looked and he came back to Buchanan. He said, you can't. You can't. He said, for the government to take up arms against any sovereign state is treason, because the treason in the Constitution is the waging of war against them, that's the sovereign states, by, and aiding and abetting in that war. The central government, the federal government, was not a state, so it could not wage war against the states. And therefore, the invasion of the South was treason. And everybody who put on the damn blue uniform was a traitor. That's exactly what they were. Years later, somebody said, yeah, there was treason. It just wasn't on the right side. The whole idea, for instance, when this whole thing started, Lincoln went to, oh dear, I can't remember the general's name, the big guy, and he got the Anaconda Plan. The Anaconda Plan. Now, you have to remember, Lincoln has already said in his inaugural address that it will be civil war. But you cannot have a blockade in a civil war. That's not legal as far as the laws of war were concerned. You could blockade an enemy country. Mm-hmm. You could blockade Mexico, you could blockade Cuba, but you can't blockade your own country. But they did. Mm-hmm. So he had, on the one hand, he had a civil war, and on the other hand, he had the war against a territory that was not his. And the whole thing was nothing more or less than whatever Lincoln wanted it to be. That's why the thing In Search of Lincoln says what happened with the Constitution. What happened, over 40,000 Northern people were put into prison because they disagreed. The Supreme Court was told, say something, and you'll be in the fort, you'll be imprisoned. Nobody stopped them. What did Seward tell the British Lyons, Lord Lyons, I think it was Lord Lyons, but I can ring a bell and have a man in New York or Pennsylvania put in prison. Can the Queen do that? Hmm. So if you want to know, where all this tyranny comes from, it's been there a long time.
Exactly, which makes it not a lost cause at all. It's a very real.
Let's put it this way. And of course, the problem now is that after years and years and years of what shall we call it, education? I don't know. I wouldn't call it education.
Re-education?
Uneducation. You have young people. You put enough fluoride in the water and all this other, the aspartame that will kill you, and all these other things that kids have been eating and drinking and been injected with for years and years. You're not going to get a very good quality of people coming down the pike. You're just not.
And that's by design, right?
Yes. Yes. Well, they're going to, they want to cull the herd, the useless eaters. I can think of a few useless eaters I'd like to cull, but they're not on the list of cullies, I don't think. I'm one. Well, of course. Time will take care.
Tell me more about, you had sent me an article that I don't think is published yet, so I won't,
you can talk.
Do spoil alerts, but the naivete of quote unquote conservatives, and then the things that we on the right choose to go after. It's
I told you
we waste so much time attacking each other.
I wouldn't mind shooting ourselves in the foot occasionally, but we shoot ourselves in the mouth, and that's generally fatal.
Right.
I told you about the sign my mother had in our dining room when I was a little kid. And it was these two Puritans in their, garb, the Puritan garb. And the two of them are looking at each other. And one says to the other, "No one is pure but me and thee." And I'm not so sure about thee. And that's what conservatives are. You can be down the line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, down to 10. 11, won't work with you.
Right.
They often will actually go with the liberals rather than a conservative. Look at what's happening with Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump, for all the, I would hope that the man is what he pretends or seems to be, because I've seen people who knew him when he was young that said he was what he seems to be. But like Ronald Reagan, he got more guff from the people that should have been on his side.
Yeah.
He wasn't pure enough. He wasn't good enough. He was, what? I mean, I said, I told you that magazine, Reagan, 5 months after he went, oh, he should be ridden out of town on a rail. What for? Well, he didn't clean up DC in 5 months.
Right.
The only thing he could have done that was a nuclear holocaust. Not that that would have been a bad thing. But the idea with conservatives is the only way I will work with you is if you're pure, you're virginal, you're a true conservative. Well, who the hell is a true conservative? If I agree with you on A, B, C, D, E, F, and maybe by get to G, well, I really don't think we should. Oh, go. What? Meanwhile, you have Muslims with gays and feminists. Gays whom they throw off roofs, you understand, and feminists who, if they were back in Iran or wherever, would be, hanged. You have Jews and blacks who do not like each other very much, but they all work together seamlessly because what matters is the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
With if I don't win the right way, the pure way. This is what Reagan used, Reagan used to tell them that, but even Mosby told them that. Bend a little so that we can work together for a common good. No, I can't work with that person. Why not? Well, I don't like them. There's a heck of a lot of people I don't like. Really, a heck of a lot of people. But let me tell you, but this is how it is. We're looking for purity. Well, I don't know. I mean, when we're all dead and when they lined us up against the wall, tell me how pure your purity is.
Right.
There's a terrible picture I watched once. I mean, it was terrible. I barely got through it, and it was about the Czechists, Chekis.
Mm-hmm.
And it was out of years ago. It was at one of these film fairs, and oh my God! And the whole thing is day after day after day, people are put into 3 rooms, then they're let out of the rooms after they're stripped naked, they're stood against a wall, and they're shot in the back. And then they come out with a hose to wash the blood away, and they drag the bodies up and they put them in a thing, and this is what went on. And this is what will happen to us. Because if they think that people have changed, that these people will, oh, they won't kill me, I'm a this or I'm a that. The first persons up against the wall with the communists are the useful idiots. God, do we have enough useful idiots to start our own useful idiot farm?
The silver lining, I think, with how quickly progressivism is, driving society off the cliff, is that I think even just a few years ago, there would still be good, well-meaning Americans who would say that will never happen in America. And I don't think people are saying that anymore because it's all happening in America now. Everything.
Once you have, I said, I hate to be, I really don't have much faith in myself, but I said with 2020, if they don't address that election, if they don't stop what happened there, and I mean it happened openly because they couldn't change it. If they don't punish the guilty, there will never be another honest election. And this last election only proves it. They've already got people saying that they saw people wiping their votes out. Well, we don't understand why the red wave didn't come. Mark Levin, whom I'm not that thrilled with, but nevertheless,
me neither.
But nonetheless, he said, I saw him and he said, there was never going to be a red wave. It was never going to happen. And you were a fool to think that it was going to happen. Because if it didn't happen in 2020, it wasn't going to happen in 2022. And to hear all these idiots, well, 2022 is the midterms. Well, no, you won't. It doesn't matter if 100% of the American people wanted something else. If the people in charge want what they want, they'll get what they want. What did Stalin say? It's not who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes.
Yes.
And I love this. Is that a dog? Yes.
It is.
I have one putty cat. Yes. Had 2.
She's just
Yes.
sitting by the door. Question, and then I want to pivot toward orthodoxy, if that's okay.
Sure, no
And then we'll
problem.
wrap it up after that. If Trump gets reelected, one of my I was on the Trump bandwagon, went to the rallies, and I wanted him to come in and kind of act like Lincoln, because we live in this Lincolnian nation state. All the conservatives love Lincoln, so I wanted him to like close down newspapers, jail political enemies, and all these kinds of things, because I knew you had to cut the head off the beast, the deep state
Yes.
beast, to try to write this course, and that did not happen.
Well, the point is, how could it?
Yeah.
If your prosecutors, if your judges, if your police, if your FBI, if your CIA are all on the other side, it would be like some nice little town in Rostov or something. The people there saying, we're not going to allow the KGB to do that.
Right.
Yeah, sure. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I think, tried that.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. The only time it works is if there's sort of a balance between those people who will act for you. But you see it with so many of the Republicans. As soon as it gets to be the point where they're going to put themselves in danger, they're going to line up. With Reagan, he got nothing from his own party. The only thing he got were the Blue Dog Democrats. They were used to be the Dixiecrats. And
yeah.
Phil Gramm eventually became a Republican. But he got nothing from his own party. They used to talk about the Rockefeller wing being the liberal wing of the GOP. No, the Rockefeller wing was the GOP. Power. And where the power is now, if suddenly Donald Trump would be anointed from heaven and he could kill things by thinking at them. Let me tell you, he would have more people behind him than you ever thought possible.
Right.
They know perfectly well that he's one man. And let me tell you, I believe personally, if he hadn't had his own bodyguards at the beginning of his presidency, he wouldn't have survived into the presidency. He was never president. They stopped everything he tried to do. The only things he was able to do were the things that he could do via executive order.
Right.
Even the people like, why did you choose this person or that person? Who the heck else was there? Nobody.
Let me let my dog out. Give me 1 second.
Oh, I understand. I have a pussycat, but he has a litter box. Yes, poor baby. Is it dinner time? Is it dinner time? You would have my cat sitting right here if it were dinner time.
This is
Okay,
professionalism.
Yes, what are you bothering her for? Important things have to be done.
Okay, so let me touch on the last point. You are an Orthodox Christian, correct?
Yes. I went into the church before I married my husband. Because I did tell the priest that I had been a Catholic, I had looked at the Protestant churches, and I said to him, Father, there's something very wrong with a church that you have to marry somebody to find. Oh.
Now, was your husband was a priest?
No, he was
not a priest.
He never went to church. And when he married me, the priest told him, you're marrying a convert. You'll go to church. And when he died, he was a deacon in the Orthodox Church.
A deacon. Oh, okay. So are you a founding member of the Orthodox Christians for Life?
He and my husband, Father Ed Pahanich, and myself were the founders, yes. After my son was born. My son had spina bifida. And the idea with a lot of doctors is, go, do not. And I said, there's something wrong with that. From what I understand about humanity, that when things get tough, you don't, of course, now that I get older, I'm beginning to wonder if there is a certain amount of, Anyway, no, I became Orthodox. I did the choir, 4-part, the Russians, 4-part a cappella. Aye. Not easy. But,
and so y'all were in a Greek church?
No, we're in the Orthodox Church in America, which originally came from the old metropolia, the Russian church.
Okay.
The Orthodox Church in this country was from Russia through Alaska. Mm-hmm. Now, ordinarily with Orthodoxy, the church that is brought into the country sets the country up with its own seminaries and priests and translates everything into the language of the country. Then it gives its blessing to that church to be, let's say, the Japanese Orthodox Church. The Japanese have an Orthodox Church. But unfortunately, in this country, what happened is, yes, it came in through the metropolia. Other churches came in, the Serbians, the Romanians, the Bulgarians, the Greeks, the Antiochians. But then you had the Russian Revolution, and the tie to Moscow was broken. So now, instead of having the Orthodox Church in America being the church in America, all of them, we have unfortunately, a heresy. We have different bishops in the same area. We shouldn't, but those are the things that happen to us, I'm afraid.
So I was chrismated into the Orthodox Church in 2017.
Oh,
and so my family and I were all Orthodox Christians too. So
yeah.
I think that's pretty cool that we have that in common as well.
Well, I told them I told Father John when the first, it was not quite the Orthodox Church in America, but it was moving towards that. And I said, Father, I said, I don't mind 2 Easters, 2 Paschas, West East. I said, but I have a daughter whose Christmas list looks like the Pentagon. I said, 2 Christmases I ain't doing. I'm not doing December 25th and January 7th because my daughter's birthday is January 12th. And I said, we will not survive that. I said, get on to the new calendar.
So I don't know if you know, but Dr. Don Livingston and I have co-founded a fellowship called the Ludlow Orthodox Fellowship, and it's about growing Orthodoxy in the South because we see it as very fertile soil for planting those seeds here.
Yes.
What do you think, knowing about the South?
Well, send me something about it so I can get involved.
Okay.
Of course, the church that came in under the Protestant group, that these great Protestant theologians, of course, the names completely escape me. My mother's name escapes me at the moment. They took a year off and decided to look back to the early church. They were tired of what was going on in Protestantism. They were tired of what was going on in Catholicism. In those days, not too much bad was going on in Catholicism. Now it's a very different thing. And they went back and they found the Orthodox Church. So they went down. There was an American council in Florida or something. The whole group come in, Protestants in their dark suits, and these bishops and the priests and the whole line. And one of them says to the bishop, "Are you still Orthodox?" What? And they did. They were brought in. They were brought into the Antiochian diocese, and they are very. Gilchrist was Peter Gilchrist. He wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
So I mean, yes, but I mean, I loved it when it gets the bishop. "Are you still Orthodox?" No, no, I'm a Jew. What do you think? Some of our Orthodox who are from the old country, they found the Americans a little. I spoke once at a thing we went to. Father Schmemann went, God rest his soul, wonderful man. And I was telling them, I said, I first went to the church, the Greek church, with my husband, and I said that I was fine in the Greek church until I found out I wasn't Greek. I said, so we came here, and I said it was mostly Russian based. I said the Russians didn't care. I said, long as you could cook and you could sing, fine. We don't care what you want. I said, but we have to have an American church. I said, we speak English. They speak Russian. My Russian is not good. My Russian is not there. So we did eventually get an American church, and it was a wonderful thing. We have my husband had actually designed and built the church I would go to now, St. Andrews, where I go to.
Wow.
Built it of Lincoln logs, would you believe? Talk about, we went all the way upstate to Lincoln logs, and they designed it. It's a beautiful church. It's the only log church on Long Island. But he did that before, when he was, of course, I'm glad he did better with the church than he did at home. For the man that got the men off the moon, if he'd done what he did at home, they'd still be there.
Right.
My mother-in-law found out about that. He designed the rocket engine on the LEM, and it's like a firecracker. You can't test it twice. You set it off, you set it off. So my mother-in-law called me and she says, John designed to get, what have they got when it doesn't work? I said, the ladder isn't finished yet.
Wow.
She went to church for the first time in 41 years. Pray for the astronauts.
Wow. That's
But he got
amazing.
them off the moon.
As far as the fellowship goes, you know how there are conservatives that spend their time pulling down other conservatives. There's a
Did I not say
strain.
that?
There's a strain within Orthodoxy of Orthodox people who spend their time pulling down other Orthodox, especially ones that want to grow Orthodoxy in the South. Because wouldn't you know, they call us lost causers. So
You have to
it's a
understand.
wild ride.
Well, you have to understand too where these, who these people were taught by. Sometimes, you know, you have good teachers and you have teachers that don't quite understand. For instance, well, for a lot like the Greeks, when Dukakis ran, who was anything but pro-life, and he hated his Greek heritage, but they supported him to the nines because what? He was Greek.
It was Greek, right?
Big fat hairy deal. I was fine in the Greek church. They found out I wasn't Greek. Then not so much. The Russians, as I say, they didn't care. Just come, leave your money in the pit. You know. But you always have that group that no one is quite pure enough. You know, as I say, the liberals don't have it too much because they understand that the big deal is to get your agenda over, and you use whoever you can. So many of these people, this book that I will send you the name of it. You can get it online. I couldn't download it. It's not very long, but it's very scary. I mean, you have no idea how strong this pagan religion is. I mean, it's pagan. It's totally pagan. It's not Jewish. It's not Christian. It's pagan, and it wants to destroy everything.
Well, Father Seraphim Rose wrote a book that I think is very much in line with what you're talking about, this 2007 article or book that you want to tell me about, where, you know, I think he wrote it in like 1975, and I think it's called Religion of the New Age or something like that.
Yeah.
And, you know, he's talking a lot about Hinduism and stuff like that, things that people were super into in like the 70s, but it's the same thing.
This group brings even Islam into this pagan, and it's about green. It's green.
Right.
Everything is green. The green man. And I'm reading this and I'm saying to myself, and chloris, the King James Version uses it twice. We use the first as green, which is what it means, like chlorophyll. Second is pale. And the pale comes from the goddess whom Apollo and his sister wife kill her children. And she turns pale. And the horse of the apocalypse, death rides a pale horse, not a green horse. It's very fascinating. I don't know, as I believe, you know, I go the same way. I don't see Aslan as being the Antichrist, because I do think that Lewis was a definite Christian. I don't think he was, but everything is so confused and everything is owned by these people. I had no idea that all the evil in the world was centered in the British Empire. I was saying to myself, what? Right. I mean, most people say the British Empire is dead. No, it's not. They control the money, and he who controls the money controls everything. And this whole environmental thing is what they're going to use to kill us. The green.
Absolutely. Right.
Green.
I mean, they call them watermelons, right? They're green on the outside, but red on the inside.
But this group is green all through, because that you even have they talk about everything in May, all the Diana. Do you know that where Diana died, they put the bridge is called the Bridge of Souls, and they put where she died, the pillar. They have a memorial up there, a pagan memorial to her, Diana. You remember Diana? She was a goddess. And Camilla, who will be his, she has a snake necklace of diamonds. They've shown pictures of it. In the ancient pagan, when Charles becomes king, his consort wears a snake necklace. These things just don't happen. I mean, well, it's just a coincidence. As my mother used to say, too many coincidences spoil the broth.
It's very esoteric, and symbols matter, and you do see repeated symbols a lot throughout the elite.
The feathers, all about the phoenix. But that's interesting. But really, in this work that this fellow did, the names of the people and what they are, and the banks Charles has all kinds of charities. The what is it? The forests in the Amazon. What are they?
Oh, what are they called?
I'm trying to think of the name of them. They're
the ones we tried to save in the 80s.
Yes, well, that's all. He's got children involved in that.
Yeah.
Huge amounts of money. And this is what
the rainforest.
And this is what the Pope is doing. This is what the Pope is doing. Mm-hmm. And that's something that should scare the heck out of every decent Catholic.
Yeah.
Because now we're back to paganism.
Right.
Oh my, yes. And the Orthodox, well, I was always of the opinion, by the time the devil came, the Orthodox said, what? The devil, oh, is he here? They would never get our attention. It's the wonderful thing about Orthodoxy is that what's the joke? How many bishops does it take to change a light bulb? And the word is change.
Change. What is this change you speak of?
Yeah, well, there's a group now that's trying to get in with the old gay issue.
Oh yeah, they're the ones that hate the fellowship.
Well, then I must join the fellowship immediately, if not
Yay!
If I don't destroy you all together just by being there. Don't tell me that one's coming. They'll change our address and our name and speak in Russian. Boris and Natasha.
Oh my goodness. Well, Val, it has been a pleasure. I think I've taken almost 2 hours of your time.
Oh, that's all right.
And
I love to talk, as you can tell.
Yeah. And your writing, I'm not just saying this because you're a guest, but I love your writing because I love writing that is bold but loving. And that's really hard to do, those two things. And I think you do those things together very well.
Oh, thank you. I try to tell people that the whole thing of these people that they try to make, the red pill, the blue pill. They were very right in that film about, what's real. People would prefer to take, the blue pill and go back.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like everything else. Comes a time when what's going to happen is going to happen, and no amount of pretending it isn't going to happen changes it.
Correct.
I mean, if you want to see how things can get screwed up, look at the Titanic. Wonderful story. If you want to know what goes on in life that's wrong, the Titanic is a great story. That ship was on fire when she set sail, would you believe? On fire. She had a 2-story coal thing that was so hot that it damaged the starboard side of the ship. And when they pulled in to pick up passengers, they brought the port side in instead of the starboard, so the people couldn't see the damage on the right side of the ship. Why did they set sail when the ship was on fire? Hello? Fire on board a ship is very dangerous. I mean, a lot of water, but really. And everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And it was in spite of the second mate left the ship and was replaced by a gentleman by the name of Lightoller. And he took the key to the locker that had the binoculars in it. Really? Really? And as they were pulling out of Southampton, these ships were huge. They were not used to them. They were so big that they did things with the water and as she was going down, the draw of her propellers pulled ships that were docked to the side away from the dock. And one of them, called the New Yorker, snapped a line and started to swing out in front of the Titanic. The captain shut the engines down, and she continued to go forward, but they were able to bring the ship back. There was a gentleman on the second class deck, and he turned to a woman there and he said, "Madam, do you love your life?" And she said, "Of course I love my life." He said, "Get off this ship." And he got off at Cherbourg. I mean, everything that could go wrong with that ship did. The night that they were on, they hit the berg, the North Atlantic, I don't know if you know much about the sea, but the North Atlantic was dead calm. The North Atlantic is never dead calm. There were no little wavelets to hit the bottom of the berg so you could see it. The berg had turned over, so her black side was up. And there was a level of moisture in the air above the ship that caused, mirage. You've seen mirages with the heat, looks like water. Well, this is something that happens on the water where it looks like the city is like this far above the land. They could not see the berg until they were on it. And then when they went to swing to the starboard to avoid it, or to the port to avoid it, I don't know whether it's, in order to do that, they went to a dead stop to turn it backwards full. But when they went to the dead stop, they lost the rudder. So they continued to go straight forward. I mean, anything you want to talk about that could go wrong, did go wrong.
Is this a metaphor for America?
There was a book written 20 years before about a boat the same size, about people on it with money that hit an iceberg in April and sank. The name of the boat given in the book was the Titan.
Wow.
Do not ever believe that there are not signs and wonders.
Yeah.
We are not left without anything, but we have to be aware. We have to be watching. And I had one thing that, everybody prays that God does this, God does that, God does the other, nice. And I said to myself, I'm wondering. And there's a thing here. Where is it? It's called Accepting God's Will. No felt evil or defect becomes divine until it is inevitable. And only when resistance to it is exhausted and hope has fled, does surrender cease to be premature. The hardness of our task lies here, that we have to strive against the grievous things of life while hope remains as if they were evil. And then when the stroke has fallen, to accept them from the hand of God and doubt not that they are good. But to the loving, trusting heart, all things are possible. And even this instant change from overstrained will to sorrowful repose, from fullest resistance to complete surrender, is realized without convulsion. And this is what happens with the suicides. People who, they're not going to accept, they're going to kill themselves. It's not the way it works. Jesus didn't want to go to the cross, as we know, in the garden. Lord, let this cup pass from me. I mean, he asked that as a man, but nevertheless, not my will, but thine. We have a right to ask for the cup to pass, but when God says no, we have to be prepared to accept it. And I have a horrible feeling that all of our efforts to do the right thing and bring goodness back to the country, I don't think it's going to happen, because I don't think that the people behind us, below us, beneath us, are able to do it. I think they've been destroyed.
Yeah.
Medically, physically, spiritually. Our churches now are almost as bad as, some of the, God knows what goes on. If we knew what went on, we might very well consider suicide, because the children are the things happening to children. You can see Bill Clinton stand there openly and speak to the American people, knowing he went to Jeffrey Epstein's terrible island and participated in these things, God knows how often. That he wasn't, they didn't drag him out of the studio and hang him from the nearest tree, which would have happened with any decent society, I assure you.
Right.
But we, we couldn't stop it. I mean, I never stood there and said to myself, well, why didn't you stop it? Really? A fat old woman? Right, that's going to happen. But we have to be prepared. There were martyrs in the early church, and they said there would be. John Chrysostom said at the end, only 1/10 would be saved.
Yes, and with each passing insane thing that happens, the separating of the wheat and the chaff happens, and sometimes it gets scary and frustrating. But
of course it gets scary, because especially those who have children. I don't have any grandchildren, thank God.
Right.
Thank God. I'm very pleased that I have no grandchildren, because I would hate to think of the world that they are going to live in.
And that's one of the reasons I started my blog and my podcast eventually, was because I have 3 sons. And I started this back in 2016. Those were like the good old days back then. And
oh yeah, those days, gee, what was the problem, officer?
Right. It's like,
I never saw that in my life.
Right.
Besides that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you like the play?
Right. But now, I mean, you do what you can do. You fight the rhetorical fights.
You have no choice.
Yeah, but you got to get your own house straight first, which is what I sent you my article, the speech that I wrote, that
yes,
I was letting chaos reign in my home, when that's really the only thing I have even a teensy bit of control over, myself in my home, and not even the people in my home that I gave birth to and married.
Well, well, what did Christ do?
Right.
He had the power to make people obey him. Make them. You don't like that? Ooh, he did. He had and even the miracles he did were poo-pooed by the Pharisee, because he wasn't what they wanted. They had another Messiah in their minds, and instead of saying, this guy, he's doing great things, maybe we ought to be listening. The people who listen to him, now they don't know anything, they're going to go to hell because they don't know anything. Well, they knew enough,
Right.
They knew enough. But the only thing you can do is the things that come to you.
Right.
Some people spend their lives running around like that proverbial chicken, looking for something to do, something to do. Meanwhile, all around them are things that they can do.
Yep.
Little things. Oh, well, that's not big enough. That's not good enough. Let me tell you, a kind word to somebody who's having a bad day can make that. I've had that once with a poor woman. She comes in. She had a very nice blouse. I said, what a pretty blouse. And she just, boom. She apparently was not having that good a day. Now, that was not a lifesaver. It didn't save her life. But it gave her a few moments of pleasure. That's all we can do.
Yep.
That's all we can do. I mean, if you have unrestricted, like Donald Trump, who, by the way, did things with unrestricted, that gentleman that helped him when he was a young man and his limousine broke down with a tire, and the black guy stopped and fixed his tire, and he sent flowers to his wife and paid his mortgage. Because he could do it.
Right.
Because he could do it. Some people say, well, I can't do very much, so I won't do anything. That doesn't make any sense. Right. All right, maybe you can't do very much. But you try to do every day what you can do. Yep. A kindness here, a kindness there. You will be surprised when the time comes, and you're standing before God, you say, you did this. I don't remember doing that. But that's what saved you. That one kind, I don't remember doing that. No, because you didn't make a big deal of it.
Right.
It's really, people either want to walk away, as I often feel like doing these days, or they they want to do something great. They want to do something wonderful. I'm here and I can't do a damn thing. And that's when the Lord says, are you listening?
Right. Hello.
Are you listening? All hands on deck.
Luckily, we get those reminders all the time.
Well, I love the Last Supper where Philip says to him, can we see the Father? And the one time in the whole gospel where Christ is exasperated, Philip, have I been with you so long that you don't know that when you see me, you see the Father? Philip, wake up. If God can get exasperated, so can we.
That's right. And Lord knows, I would have given up on human beings a long time ago if I was God. I'd just be like, done. But his love is endless.
Well, the thing that I always remember that one priest telling me is, my child, before God began creation, he knew there would be a cross. Before anything began. It's not like it came as a big shock.
Right.
Before he even started it, he knew there would be a cross. Now, that's I who don't like the dentist, I would certainly never be the proper person to begin all of creation.
Yes, yes.
Probably do it all backwards anyway. Oh, wait a minute. Well, what was it? No. Oh, gee. Did that eat that? Oh. No.
Well, Val, it has been a pleasure, and
it's been wonderful. I hope we do this not necessarily for a podcast, but we
yes.
go together.
I'd love to meet you in person sometime, and I'll fill you in about the fellowship just through email or something. And maybe one day we'll have a conference, which we're hoping to do in 2023, and perhaps you will come and participate.
Well, I would love so. Of course, several people who hear where I'm going want to know where they can go elsewhere. Yes, I'm going to be busy that day. How do you know? I'm going to a funeral. Wasn't that what Mark Twain said once? That they built a year away. I'm going to be going to a funeral.
That sounds like something he would say. Well, it has been a pleasure, and thank you so much. And once again, referencing our email conversation, you had called Clyde Wilson a national treasure. I think you are a national treasure. So thank you for being with us.
At least I've got the weight for it. You can always use me to hold something down. Dr. Wilson, he's a lovely gentleman.
Well, I'm so glad he turned us onto each other so we could have this conversation and become acquainted. And I hope it is the start of a fruitful friendship. And I just, like I said, I love everything you do. And I thank you for coming on.
Well, if you have a particular subject you want me to opine about, my mother says you know everything about everything, even if you don't know anything about anything.
So if I come up with a topic, you can write about it?
Yeah.
All right. All right.
What did Father Schmemann once say? He said, as I grow older, I know more and more about less and less, and soon I will know everything about nothing.
I like it. All right, Val. Well, thank you so much. And I appreciate it. And God bless you.
God bless you too. Have a good night and a happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, same to you, dear.
Eat meat because it kills the buzz.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.